Good morning, dear members, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we will have the first discussion series of Shell Club 15. May we please request you to be mindful of the following guidelines. This event will be recorded. Please label your gadgets with your name for proper identification. During the talk, you may use the chat room to post your questions. You may also use the chat room for any concerns. The Secretariat will attend to you. Apologies, but we will be muting all participants so as not to distract our guest speaker and panelists. You may post your questions and concerns at the chat room where you will be assisted by the Secretariat. In compliance with Shell safety standards, please ensure that you follow this safety advice. Please be aware of your surroundings, especially if you are using a headset. May I now call on the Corporate Secretary of Shell Club 15 to lead us in prayer.
Good morning, everyone. Let us all put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father in heaven, please bless this gathering of your people as we try to understand fully an important event that our nation will face in a couple of months. Please stay with us, Lord. May your light come through clearly through the spectrum of our decisions as we all strive to arrive at a full understanding of the issues at hand. Make us know that your light can come from any direction that will touch us in many different ways. Let not the issues be dispersed because we have only one mission, which is to make our decisions aligned with your holy will for the good of all. Lord, bless our participants, panelists, and speaker. May the Holy Spirit dwell in them as we tackle the issues that will be discussed today. This we ask in the mighty name of Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Menchu. Good morning, everybody. May I now call on the chairman of Shell Club 15 to do the welcome remarks and introduction of speakers, Mr. Bastet Quiñones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mila. Dear members of Shell Club 15 Plus, our guest speaker, Dean Tony La Vina, the panel of moderators, Daday De Leon, Art Valencia, Paulo Gavino, and Attorney Janet Regalado, our esteemed amicus curiae to the courts of the Philippines, but amicus uste ad aras to Shell Club 15 Plus. On behalf of the Board of Directors and Secretariat, I welcome you to the first online discussion series for 2022 on Eleksyon, Pag-asa o Pagdurusa. The topic of discussion today is voters' preference and trends, social media influence, desirable criteria, and campaign platforms of candidates. Note that this is a non-partisan event, and though we all have our personal preferences, we all need to be informed in a factual way how the electorate is influenced and what candidates have to offer. Our speaker definitely has the expertise to expound authoritatively on this topic. We were also able to get our own experts who will moderate questions from the members, and I know that some have already sent them. And for those attending now, as Mila had mentioned, you are free to post in the chat box. The panelists will also inject their own views or expound on what the speaker had discussed. They are as follows. Joining us very early in the morning from the Netherlands. In fact, it's 3 a.m. there. Our first panelist is Maria Divina Daday De Leon. Daday is currently working in Shell International based in The Hague, the Netherlands, and is the principal technical expert for corporate social performance and part of Shell's Human Rights Working Group. She's an active member of the Couples for Christ supporting her husband, si Mel De Leon, kasama ko dun sa Pililla Refinery before, and who's the country head of the CFC Netherlands. In their mission, they're actively helping undocumented Filipino domestic workers avail of support and proper education on their rights. Dada is also a member of the UP Netherlands Alumni Association, which is planning to hold sessions to educate Filipino expatriate voters. Daday was also, as what I am now in PSFI, Filipino Shell Foundation. The next panelist is my very long-time colleague and invaluable advisor on external affairs. He is Paulo Gavino. Paulo, mechanical engineer from UP, board top-notcher, and 20-year Shell veteran. He's been in many aspects in the business now, both in PSPC and in SPECS. And he's the advocacy manager for the Shell companies in the Philippines and does corporate relations for SPECS and Malampaya. Paulo really helped a lot when we did our Malampaya gas to power project. And he's also been used as a sort of a, helper, amicus curiae type also for things in crisis management. And like when he's been in places like in Brunei and Pakistan to help them in those particular areas. He was also in 2018, he was also in the Shell headquarters in The Hague, Netherlands, as part of the Global External Relations Strategy and Planning team, and was also involved in reputation planning across 40 countries. Paulo used to also be in human relations before his stint in external affairs, and he's currently a member of the board of the Dutch Chamber of Commerce, the Philippine Energy Independence Council, and a member of the Institute of Corporate Directors. Our next panelist is Art Valencia. Art, in his 23 years of Shell, was in supply, corporate planning, and mostly in international LPG trading, which he helped set up the Shell gas network in the 90s with expat assignments in London and Singapore. Art is now a part-time lecturer at the John Gokongwei School of Management at the Ateneo de Manila, and he teaches strategy and cross-cultural communication and is a lead facilitator in international corporate seminars and good management. You can follow him on Instagram, Fidemetry. Yeah, Fidemetry. Okay. Now, I also mentioned Attorney Janet before, as she will be asked to introduce, she will be tasked to introduce our guest speaker. But let me have the honor also of introducing Shell Club 15 Plus Amicus Uste ad Aras. So, Attorney J is a corporate lawyer, a legal consultant, and a professor at different law schools, UP College of Law, LaSalle, Lyceum College of Law. She finished her AB Political Science magna cum laude at the College of Law at the UP. Now, Janet has been very active even in her undergraduate days and law school days. She's a member of the UP Center for Nationalist Studies, Independent Student Alliance during those times, and a leader, of course, at the UP College of Law and a secretary of the law student government. She was also the president of the UP Portia sorority, where she is now chairman, by the way. So Janet has started corporate in Carpio, Villarasa Cruz, then went to First Lepanto, and then eventually the Shell companies in the Philippines, being the youngest legal counsel at that particular time. After a lot of periods where she went also in HR, where she was industrial and employee relations, assisting me in a lot of CBAs and the like, she then rose to the head of the legal department. And then when all of the things became global, Janet was handled two large management roles. She was, aside from vice president legal and managing counsel for global litigation for Asia Pacific, spanning so many countries, Malaysia, Pakistan, India, China, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, and she was also the VP for legal and corporate, chief corporate compliance officer. She still is a member of various organizations that are focused on legal advocacy, innovations, and improvements on legal skills, like the IBP, the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, the International Center for Conflict Resolution, Philippine Institute of Arbiters, Inter-Pacific Bar Association, many more. Okay. With such a powerhouse group, I am sure that we will all be enlightened with the knowledge that we will need And I pray that it will be used for us to wisely choose the future leaders of our country. My sincere thanks to the Secretariat and the support staff who made this event possible. This is again the first of a series, so we'll be having many more for this year. Now, it is my honor to hand you to Amicus Janet to get the proceedings in play and to introduce our guest speaker. Welcome again and good day.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
Good morning.
Janet, good
So
morning.
thank you very much, Baste, for that introduction. And I'm so pleased to see my Shell colleagues this morning. So my role is to actually introduce a very close friend, my seatmate during first year in the College of Law, my political colleague also, because we actually share the same political interest and affiliation when we were in law school. He was also the #1 supporter of me and my husband. So Tony is really very, very close to me. But talking about his competencies and his strengths, I'm so proud to actually introduce him. So Dr. Antonio La Vina is a teacher, a leader, a thinker, a human rights, environmental and climate justice lawyer, and a social entrepreneur. He is Associate Director for Policy and International Relations of the Manila Observatory, which has led as Executive Director from 2016 to 2018 and 2020 to 2021. Tony has been a human rights, environmental, and climate justice lawyer for more than 30 years, starting his career as an advocate lawyer for more than 30 years, fighting for indigenous peoples, local communities, fighting development aggression by logging and mining companies, and in some cases, by the government when it is pursuing environmentally destructive projects. Dean Tony teaches philosophy, constitutional and political law subjects, environmental law and policy negotiations, plus conflict management and leadership subjects in several universities and learning institutions in the Philippines, including in Mindanao, and several seminaries. Maybe in his past life, I was teasing Tony that he was probably a priest. So anyway, he's also currently chair of the Jurisprudence Academy of the Supreme Court of the Philippines. He is also a renowned scholar, having published many books and articles and a public intellectual writing regularly for Manila Standard, Rappler, and Minda News. Tony has been leading as a negotiator of the Philippines on climate change and is recognized as a global leader in this effort. Dean Tony was also formerly the Dean of the Ateneo School of Government, an Undersecretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, a Senior Fellow and Program Director at the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C., and of the Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center and Ashoka, Philippines. He obtained his LLM and JSc degrees from the Yale University and his first degrees in philosophy and law from Ateneo de Manila University and the University of the Philippines, respectively. By the way, Dean Tony placed third in the bar exams. So I'm very, very proud to present Dr. Tony La Vina to my wonderful and fantastic Shell colleagues. Okay. Good morning, Tony. Over to you.
Magandang umaga. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm comfortable with this audience. I don't know if some of you will remember, but I actually have a long history with Shell, and it's been a good history, a good relationship all these years. For more than 30 years, I actually oversaw the environmental impact assessment process of Malampaya, which was one of the best ever. In fact, I wrote a case study of that, or co-wrote a case of that study of that was published in the World Resources Institute. It's one of the most well-read books I have written. It was about community consent and how we dealt with social issues in the Shell Manampa. People would have forgotten now. Maybe in your case, the institutional memory will not be there, but I had a very good team that I assigned to that. I didn't have to even personally get involved because everything went well, because Shell did everything that was necessary to comply with not just with Philippine environmental impact assessment rules and policies, but also norms. And yes, of course, Susie, I remember speaking at the powering conferences. I even did work with you. I know, Basta, you would remember, right? On Pandacan. As a mediator, I did not advocate either side, but I was hired by the Netherlands government to see if there were possibilities of mediating on that. And of course, Janet has invited me a couple of times also to the board and other audiences within Shell. So this is a comfortable audience. I also welcome this because the opportunity to talk about politics in the country with rational people in a hyper-partisan context is really welcome, because we really need to do that moving forward. And not just because of the candidates, or some candidates need to win because of our candidates, but really for national interest. Because there are certain things that might happen at the final stages of this election, where really statesmen, wise people, impartial people, or people who might be partisan but can also, understand other people's perspectives would be very important. And I'll explain why in a while. But I actually just came from I have a really good illustration. Just came from an experience this past week of what I mean. Last December 31, last day of the year, I was invited by Christian Espiritu, Christian Esguerra rather, of ANC for a 1-hour year-ender of Philippine politics. If you know, Christian is one of the best in the world, actually, interviewer. He does his research, he explores issues, he probes issues. He's not a wallflower. He will push you back. He will make you think of scenarios. So it was a good interview, and people who watch it actually, regardless of partisan inclinations, actually reached out to me and congratulated me also for being very rational and being very systematic about what we were facing. I was talking about the polling that happened, that was just reported in December. The surveys reported how the campaigns were unfolding. What's the, is President Duterte still influence? How did he become a lame duck? Just like this, the most authoritarian president we've ever had since Marcos, at least. The one that really set aside everyone's opinions and even the rule of law, is suddenly one of the least powerful in the government. And I was trying to explain all of that. And one of the questions asked was about the disqualification of Bongbong Marcos, the disqualification cases. And I actually said I was very hard-nosed about it. This is the reason why he should be disqualified. This is the defense he has mounted. It's up to the COMELEC and the Supreme Court to decide this. And as long as they decide it independently, I can live with that decision. Because you know this, you've had legal cases. There are complex legal cases, there are difficult legal cases, and you could go either way. And I was not going to advocate any one or the other, because that would violate my principle to be non-partisan in this election season. That's my position, to be non-partisan. So you will invite me, because if you know that I was campaigning for someone, you will not invite me, right? I get to talk, believe it or not, 12 times a week to all kinds of audiences, precisely because I'm non-partisan, because people expect me to be objective. So I did not take any side. I just say, well, you do this, you do that. But I did say then that timing is important in the disqualification decision. That's why I was saying to you that on the end game of this, we all have to sort of rise above all our partisan concerns and see what's good for the country, because timing is important. You should not, I said, and the court probably will not, and that's a scenario, I'm not advocating it, decide a disqualification issue on election day, on the eve of election day, or maybe a week before election, because you basically nullify the whole campaign period when you do that. You have, I was saying that the scenario should be a month before. If they disqualify Marcos, it should be over by the end of March. The Grace Poe case was unacceptable, except that Grace Poe she won the case, then it went okay. But Grace Poe case was decided a week before the elections, the final motions for reconsideration. What if they did not decide the case before the election and she won? If she loses, that's fine. If Marcos loses, that's fine. But if you decide the case after the election and he won, if he wins, that is actually going to be tragic for the country. I'm talking about the military takeover. I'm talking about unrest in the streets. I'm talking about instability galore for the next years. Whoever is finally elected, whether Sara is the one that will come forward, or Isko Moreno, or VP Robredo is a number 2, depending on the scenarios, right? So it's just being rational and saying these are things that could happen. I'm not advocating any of this. Of course, then the Marcos campaign gets that part of the interview and says, I support his case. And then not all naman, many of the Robredo supporters really gets mad at me, calls me all sorts of names, no? But guess what? It doesn't bother me, because precisely that's the role that I have decided to play, which is to call the shots as I see it, independently, without siding with anyone, and with the lens mainly of what is good for what is good for the country. So we'll go back to that later on when I present the candidates, the campaigns, their platforms, and their probabilities of winning in the second half of this talk. But I do want to start by highlighting. This is before I show my PowerPoint which is more systematic. But I want to highlight 2 big picture events in December. Physical events that happened December, January, that I suspect will have a major influence on how the campaign will unfold, and maybe will even have an influence eventually on who will win in these elections. The first is Typhoon Odette, as you know, that hit many parts of Mindanao and the Visayas in December. Many of the areas hit, including very vote-rich areas like Cebu, are still suffering the aftermath of that. So in those places, climate change, disaster, how the government is responding, how the campaigns are responding, the presence of candidates in those areas, as we've seen, for example, Vice President Robredo has done very well with that. The relief that they have provided will have an impact on how voters in those areas will decide. Certainly in those areas, I know local governments have to deal now with environmental issues, defend environmental decisions that they didn't have to before December. Of course, memory is short, and maybe in May they would have forgotten that already, and so maybe it would recede already. But right now, top of mind in these areas are those issues, and in particular the government response. And it's one of those ironic things where the government response can benefit well, it's one of the things where the government should benefit administration candidates, But in a weird context, we don't have an administration candidate, right? This is the first time in recent history, well, I think ever, that the administration, at least as of now, doesn't have explicitly a candidate for president. They have for vice president, we know that, just by the family name. But they do not have a candidate for president. And the political operatives and the government people, the politicians in government are left on their own right now. In spite of the criticisms that the Duterte's, President Duterte's fired or charged against Bongbong Marcos, there is no order from above to side with a candidate or another. One candidate, we know, Mayor Isko Moreno, has completely shifted to try to get that endorsement of President Duterte that so far has not come, although quite a number of allies of Duterte, if they're not with Marcos, they are with Mayor Moreno. But that's an important thing to consider as this unfolds, because the government can direct resources for relief and rehabilitation that in a way that it can favor candidates. Ironically, if Bongo stayed on as a candidate, he would benefit immensely from this, but whether or not that will be enough to position him to win, maybe not. But he would benefit from Odette and the way government can respond to Odette. On the other hand, if the administration fails to respond to Odette properly and effectively and promptly, the administration should suffer. But which one? Right? It doesn't seem that Bongbong Marcos will suffer from the failure of the Duterte government. He gets this benefit of being supported by the Duterte voters, but without having to defend the Duterte record. Another physical event, which is a big picture event that I would like to start and with and we'll go back to when we look at the campaigns, is the surge we are currently facing. Whether this is Delta or Omicron, we all know that we are facing a massive escalating surge, which hopefully will, of course, at some point, like all coronavirus surges, will peak, right? I'm not going to venture when, end of January, mid-February, all the way down to March. It depends, but I think by election time, probably the peak is over. But at the height of the campaign, January to April, or January to March, right? Or the first half of the campaign, we will have the surge, which has, as you know, infected very many of us. I don't know how many of you, but they're saying here, if you don't know anyone, if you don't have a friend or a relative who has not been infected, you do not have friends or relatives at all. Almost all households, or all households I know, in fact, including my own household, has had challenges related to that. Thankfully, in my case, so far, none. I live with a 90-year-old mother-in-law, so that's protecting her is a priority, which means I have to protect myself, and my wife also has to do that. But the surge is having a great impact on the elections. First, it's freezing the campaigns. They cannot move. They cannot act. They cannot go places. Vice President Robredo has a lot of volunteers. This is the time when those volunteers actually, I tell them, you have to take a leave from your job for 3 months. Take a leave. You have to immerse in villages, in barangays, because that's where Marcos is winning. Marcos is winning because he is the only campaign that is present in all barangays of the Philippines. He has an operative there, paid operative with resources there. That was started already in the 2016 campaign and continued now. You don't have the resources in the Robredo campaign for that, but you have the people, you have the individuals, you have the motivation. But if you're still working now, There's no chance you can catch up. You have to take a leave. It has to be full-time for 2 to 3 months or 4 months even. If not now, at least by February or March, certainly by April. But that might be too late because things might have, my suspicion is by end of March, the results of the elections, potential results would have been consolidated already, and leads would be consolidated. That's actually what happens in our case. After the debates, people make their final decision, and the debates are usually in March. Mayor Moreno, if you have followed Mayor Moreno, as I have done for the last 6 years during the mayoralty campaign, his strength is he goes right to the center of barangays, of villages, of people. He dances, he shakes hands, he embraces people. He tells good stories. That's his strength, and I would have expected him at least by February to be doing that 24/7 as he did in Manila. That's how he defeated Arab in Manila, by doing that. But he won't be able to do that. He's not able to do that. He was trying to do that in December, already beginning to do that, planning to do that really 24/7 now, and February. He won't be able to do that because of the surge. Manny Pacquiao is a populist candidate. Everywhere he goes, especially before the campaign, he has these thousands of pesos that he just gives away, right? So he's mobbed by people. Whether that will get him votes is a big question, but that's his campaign style. That too cannot happen, right? So now the campaigns are back to traditional media, advertisements, radio and TV, and of course social media, which has now even become a bigger campaign area. This surge has also, let me put it this way, resurrected President Duterte's power. Made him even again relevant, di ba? He proposed, and I would say unconstitutional and absurd proposition that unvaccinated people cannot leave their house. It's okay to say don't leave your houses, that's fine as a guidance. That's safe. But you arrest unvaccinated people, that's crazy. Diba? What will you do? You will ask everyone for an vaccinating ID, everyone in the street, everyone. That is unenforceable and that's unconstitutional. You cannot do that. But now he's relevant again in saying those things. I mean, if people have backed down and say, no, we will not do that. We will just guide them. We will just tell people, do not leave your house if you're unvaccinated, etc., etc. But now they will have to do ayuda again, especially if you go to alert level 4 and everything closes down again in the economy. They'll have to do ayuda. Perfect time politically to do ayuda. Imagine a handout of 5,000 to 10,000 people in the barangays. And guess who will be distributing that? Barangay leaders. And guess who most of the barangay leaders are affiliated with, have been affiliated with since 2016. At least in barangays that count. You ask yourself, why is Bongbong Marcos leading a lot in Metro Manila? 60 to 70%. He won Metro Manila in 2016 by 60% of the votes. It's because of the barangays, the extent of the barangay operation. So these are the two things that are physical things that were not expected. And ability of the campaigns to adjust to these two things is the one that will lead them to potential victory, that can lead them to victory. Of course, from a political point of view, the two big picture things I will emphasize for my January talks, you're the fourth group I am talking to actually in January. I started only last Monday, and you're the fourth group already. And so I highlight what are the January things to emphasize. The polling in December. The polling in December is consistent. The surveys in December are consistent. That's Pulse Asia. That's Okta Research. That's other Laylaw research. Those three are credible for me. I know their methodologies. our research, our survey research firms follow the same, most of them follow the same methodology of random sampling. That's quite proven already, face-to-face, and not phone-based, because our phone databases are unreliable. Random sampling is good. Sampling of barangays, distribution of barangays across the country is good. Very good track history for SWS and Pulse, at least. The only time that Pulse and SWS actually failed or did not predict correctly was the GMA election in 2004, when they said GMA would win by a landslide against Fernando Po, and that did not happen. The explanation was many of the people that voted Rains Po refused to answer correctly because they were embarrassed or they were intimidated by those who say bobo ka if you voted for Fernando Po. They also failed to predict the Trillanes victory in 2007 and Grace Po's #1 position in 2010 because it was a surge that happened in the last week. But otherwise, all their predictions since at least post Marcos have actually been correct in this polling. The snapshot, and let's be clear about that, this is a snapshot before the campaigns even began. The snapshots in December are probably good snapshots. We don't have the SWS results yet. They should come out soon. It would be very interesting if the results would be very different. But the highlight of the polling in December is that Marcos is polling more than 50% of the vote. That is actually not rocket science to understand that. You know, those of us, I chair actually a group called Movement Against Disinformation that's trying to address disinformation in this campaign and beyond. We would sometimes say, that one of the reasons Marcos is polling so high is because of disinformation, revisionism, the kind of thing they did with my analysis, with my interview, with distorting it and misusing it, and that's partly true. But that doesn't explain it alone, right? What explains the majority kind of support that we have now for Marcos is very simple. Marcos has 2 blocks of voters that are supporting him. The Marcos loyalists, which by the way has remained fairly constant. So even the proposition that revisionism has worked can be questioned, because the Marcos family has always had 20 to 30% support of the electorate. When Cory won over Marcos, or when EDSA revolution happened, at very best we had a 50-50 country that 50% supported Marcos, 50% supported the opposition. And through the years, actually that has decreased, but always a solid 1/4 of the country would be supportive of Marcos. Where is the other 1/4 coming from for that support? Well, the other 1/4 is coming from the Duterte supporters. In spite of what Duterte said about Marcos or implied about Marcos being a cocaine addict, being a weakling, all of those things that he has said about Marcos, the Duterte supporters, those who would have voted for Sara Duterte if Sara ran for president, those who consider themselves hardcore Duterte supporters are siding with Marcos. Which tells you what the path of victory is of Lenny, of Isko, even of Pacquiao. No? I think those 3 still have some outside chance of winning, or at least of changing the trajectory. Which is they have to extract the Duterte vote from Marcos. That's what you have to appeal to. That block of voters that are solid Duterte supporters, but not Marcos supporters, but right now are leaning towards Marcos. You want to extract them away from that. And that is why an anti-Duterte campaign, to be honest, will probably not succeed in doing that. And it's going to be very tricky, obviously, for example, for VP Lenny to pivot to an appeal to Duterte supporters because she has actually consolidated the opposition vote, the anti-Duterte vote, and the anti-Marcos vote in her camp. And that's going to be the challenge as we move forward. But that's where we are. And I always say you can change. Of course, that's polling for December. It looks like we won't have polling for January or February, at least good polling, because how can they enter barangays with a surge, diba? And that's unfortunate. That means the next polling we might get would be February or March of the kind of face-to-face that we should get. What then needs to be done between now and March is to run a different campaign. For those that are for Marcos, it's to stay as it is. But for the other campaigns, they have to radically change their campaigns, their messaging, and their strategy to get to that 1/2 of the vote of Marcos and chip away from that. Maybe for someone like Isko, with the help of Duterte, if in fact Duterte eventually endorses Isko. For Lenny, maybe it will have to be a shifting of messaging. Very subtle. To be more supportive of the Duterte, at least the Duterte programs and policies that are not controversial. And certainly cease from attacking Duterte, which is difficult to do because of, it's something your audiences expect, your campaign, your own publics expect. So let me go now to something more systematic in the next 15 minutes. I'll finish at 11, so you can then have a discussion and ask questions. So I'll use a PowerPoint for this part. Okay. When I make this formal presentation, I emphasize always that our options are imperfect and the votes you will cast will be imperfect. I don't think I've ever casted a vote in the Philippines where I felt 100% good. Either because I knew my candidate was going to lose, or I knew that I was voting for someone that was not going to solve the country's problems or all of the country's problems. But what I tell my audiences now is don't settle for the lesser evil. Settle for the candidate that is the best among those who can win. But I think it's also important to ask that question whether a candidate can win and not just vote for a candidate that we really like but might not be able to win. In my systematic presentations, but I will actually skip the first two just quickly and just goes to the candidates right away. I do talk especially to student audiences and church audiences, but business audiences should also appreciate this. I think our priority should be keep our election safe for maximum participation. I mean, with the surge, we're back again to making sure the campaigns are safely done. We want to make sure that the voting day is safe also. Otherwise, people will not come out. And that will only favor local machineries if people do not come out on their own. We have to keep in the internet safe also during the elections. Because we don't want lies and distortions to influence the results of the elections. The agenda for the future should also be on top of our decisions on who to vote for. For an audience like you, I'm going to emphasize rule of law as probably your main issue. You want a president that is respectful consistently on the rule of law. it's imperfect, our choices, because of the kind of democracy we have. And I let me use this as a teaching moment. I mean, because I've followed as an expert on governance, our political democracy tas unfolded. It has gotten worse, no? It has gotten worse through the years. The decline of political parties, the rise of personalities and families, really a multi-party system that doesn't exist, no? We should have seen this coming in the failure of the 1987 Constitution to ban political dynasties, in resorting back to a presidential system that meant we're gonna only have a trip of Jerusalem, sort of changing of seats of elite factions of our society, broken once in a while by, well, broken once really only by as I would consider Estrada also elite, but by Duterte, which came from a provincial power elite. But it's all based on families and personalities. Of course, I do not have to stress how socially unequal our society has been. And elections is seen by many of our people as their chance to, to inflict revenge on the politicians, on making the politicians entertain and dance and sing with them, and their chance to, to make their voices known. Elections are seen by many people in the Philippines, most people in the Philippines are as game changers, but ironically, voting patterns are pretty much the same from A to E. It's amazing how, for example, this lead of Marcos, 50%, it's across the board. I think he has even a higher lead among A, B, and C than he has in D and E. Of course, one explanation now is that's more C than A and B, but I don't know. There's just too few A and Bs that are interviewed for these surveys, that's why they lump them as A, B, and C. Anyway, elections have to be safe, and there are reasons for doing that. We had a safe referendum in Palawan, so it should be done. The US elections was safe. The Indonesian election was safe. India's elections last year were not safe. And I think they've learned from that and now preventing campaign rallies. So really, we really cannot have campaign rallies in the next 2 months, at least, to be safe. And you cannot really allow candidates to, they should refrain from going around as they were doing in November and December. Which means there'll be a lot of action on the legal side, like in the disqualification side, and in the social media side. And we need to be vigilant about that. For the issues, there's just a set of issues I want you to look at without having to go through all of them. I said climate change, non-issue in November, big issue in some places in December, and I know that many of the climate justice groups that I work with are going to challenge all the presidential candidates on their positions on coal, their positions on fossil fuel, their positions on the Paris Agreement and on climate finance, etc. So maybe that will have some resonance nationally, but certainly resonance locally. Mining usually is not an issue, but it's a local issue. For example, in Surigao, where there are several mining operations and several proposed mining operations, but has been heavily affected by Odette. No, there's a big mining decision to be made in South Cotabato in Mindanao, so that too will be affected by this new concern about environment that Typhoon Odette have come out have instigated. The Mandanas ruling is important. As you know, the Mandanas ruling shifts revenue significantly to local governments, making local governments more powerful in the next years. With the Mandanas ruling, local governments might actually feel they don't have to be beholden to the national government as much, especially the big cities and the big provinces, the rich ones. They feel they might be able to do things on their own. And so election-wise, that is big for them. They're asking every presidential candidate to commit not to change the Mandanas formula. The Mandanas formula makes the national government share revenue, not just from income tax or internal revenue, but from all taxes, including tariff, sales tax, excise tax, etc., and that they should be released automatically to local governments. It's a revolutionary change. That should have been done in 1991, but the national government did not do it. And now we're faced with several very big transition issues related to that. Of course, rule of law and human rights, what's been done to businesses, I think you might be dealing with some of that. Corruption issues, all of that are issues also in this campaign. Formally continues to be a big big audience. Just to let you know that I know they'll probably deal with the Malampaya Dennis Uy thing after that, so you might be in the focus of that. I will not. I don't know much about that, so I won't comment on that. But that will that could be the next issue to be investigated, and obviously it will be election related because Senator Gordon, who's running this investigation, is part of the will make it an election issue, certain an anti-Duterte issue. Of course, the biggest issue is still the pandemic, the health aspects and the economic aspects exiting from the pandemic. We need to actually ask our presidential candidates what's the best. And in my next final points, I will address how the candidates are saying something about this or not saying something about this. So assessments, Marcos. I mean, the question about Marcos is why is he polling so well? And as I said, the answer is that because he was able to consolidate the Duterte votes. You have to credit him for first, even under immense pressure, we know from President Duterte and even from President Arroyo, he refused to slide down and be VP of SARA. And then the respect and courtship he made of SARA to become VP, it has to be in his credit. Has to be his credit in doing that. From what I know, Sara really had made the decision she was not ready to be president. I can also guess that she didn't want to be president if that meant she would owe her father the victory. The father, we know, this is all out in the open, so this is not just chismis. The father really went after her for months to run or to set aside so Bongo and he could run. Not to run at all. I think that was his preference. Bongo and Duterte would run for president and vice president. Was his preference. But if you really want to run, this is the account of Sara, which she made public. There was a confrontation between Sara, the mother of Sara, who's, as you know, annulled, the marriage is annulled with Digong Duterte, and Bongo. They sat down, and Sara and President Duterte said, you either had two statements: you will run, Bongo as your VP, or Bongo and I will run and you will not run at all. Sara recorded that, and then the answer of Sara is no. If you want to run, you run. But I will not run for president. At that point, there was no discussion whether she will run for VP or not. And then, after that meeting, Sara released a statement recounting what happened. So, as I said, I credit Marcos for for the very clever, wise way of dealing with this and ending up with the best tandem possible for him. Because if Sara ran, or if Sara ran for president, that they would divide the vote. They would still be leading candidates, but they would divide the votes among them. And if Sara did not run, then he might not necessarily get most of that Duterte voters. Two weaknesses in the Marcos campaign, and one is inherent, the disqualification case, which is based on a conviction, a criminal conviction of not paying taxes when he was governor. It's a mala in se crime, so it doesn't matter whether he intended it or not. Originally, we was imposed imprisonment, but that was set aside by the Court of Appeals and just imposed a fine, which is why he did not appeal to the Supreme Court. Because if he appealed to the Supreme Court might have restored the penalty of imprisonment. So technically the question is, was he convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, which is usually defined as a crime involving a minimum set of imprisonment? Without going to the pros and cons of the legal issues here, all that I can say is, if I were a COMELEC commissioner or I were a justice, I could vote either way. I would vote depending on my political leanings, to be honest, because I could vote either way. My only hope is that the COMELEC decide this on their own, without anyone, in particular Duterte, trying to influence them one way or the other. And the Supreme Court would vote this on their own, independently. And my hope, as I said, is that they decide this long before the campaign is over. But that's not likely, by the way. The Grace Po case was decided by the COMELEC on the first week of December. By the third week of December, the Supreme Court already issued, right after Christmas, a TRO so that Grace Po remained on the ballot. It took 1 month for pleadings to be exchanged. February was the oral arguments. The first decision came out 2 or 3 weeks after the oral arguments, end of March. And the motions for reconsideration were decided all in Grace Po's favor only on the last week of April, 2 weeks before the elections, very close to the elections. This one, the COMELEC hasn't decided yet, and there are 6 cases. According to Chairman Abbas, we guested in CNN together. The reason for that is they were not able to, there's so many disqualification cases. Yan ang isang problema natin ngayon na kasi everywhere now tries to disqualify each other if they cannot win against the other. So there's lots and lots of disqualification cases that are being filed at every level. But they're prioritizing this. So by the end of January, probably, the COMELEC would have decided. The divisions, first and second divisions, will decide this by at most siguro 3rd week of January or last week of January. But there's still the COMELEC and bank for motion for reconsideration. Buti na lang walang motion for reconsideration sa division. Diretso siya sa NBank. But the NBank will take another 1 or 2 weeks. So mid-February siya pupunta ng Supreme Court. Exchange of pleadings, maybe 1 month. Oral arguments, maybe 1 month. Submitted for resolution, maybe April 15. Very dangerously close to election day. Because you really don't want this to be decided on the eve of election day, or worse, after the elections, if someone has already won and you disqualify that person. Because that is your certainty of political instability for years to come. That's why, that explains GMA's presidency. Frankly, as a political observer, I would have thought President Arroyo would have been the best president ever, most prepared ever. But because he took power illegitimately for many of the poor, many of the voters of Estrada, he had to contend with so much instability in her 4 years. in that role. And then he had a very close election where perception that there was cheating, whether that's true or not, but there was perception of that. And that made his 10 years, frankly, one of the worst in our history in terms of politicized governance, because she had to survive. The other big weakness of Marcos is inherent also in, and it's a product of his strength. His strength is that he's a Marcos, and he gets these votes, right? Even without doing anything. And in effect, he's not doing anything. He really has no program. Honestly, because I try to be very non-partisan, I try to follow his campaign. I know the journalists that follow his campaign. I won't mention them, obviously, because but I know several of them. I ask them, what did he say? Or if there are videos available, I look at it. He doesn't give interviews. He's coasting along. That's what he's doing. He doesn't have positions that are very specific. They're all very generalities. It's about unity, unifying the people. Bygones are bygones. Incredibly, he has gotten that change mantle. People voting for him are saying we're voting for him because we want a changed Philippines, a different Philippines, including Duterte supporters, di ba? For sure, Marcos has had the best minds, the best advertising minds in the Philippines and globally to be able to do this. It's such a sophisticated campaign. The internet web-based campaign is also very sophisticated. It's not very easy to respond to disinformation by the Marcos campaign because it's really very, very subtle. Sorry. It's not moving. Sorry. Just a minute. Hindi nag-move yung ano ko. It's not moving. The next one, let me just stop the sharing and then go back again. Sorry. Okay. The Dutertes, I said already, in December 31, I said wala na si Duterte. Duterte is irrelevant. You know. But I have to take that back because of Odette and because of the coronavirus. No? Now, of course, if his health permits him, he can do a lot of naughty things, he can disturb the process, the elections, he can give an endorsement of someone other than Marcos, he can do all sorts of things, he can instruct his people to do certain things. So I will retract what I said that Marcos is Duterte is a complete lame duck and is irrelevant. Although right now, I think it's still correct to say that he's the first president that has no candidate as of now, and the first president who might not have any say at all on who will replace him. Lacson Soto. I followed Lacson. Very good positions, very solid governance solutions to problems. I have no debate. Very anti-corruption, the best on anti-corruption. I think he's proven himself naman there in terms of this record in the Senate. Good disaster reduction experience from being the disaster relief czar, rehabilitation czar of Pinoy. I, of course, have differences with him on human rights, on the anti-terror law. He knows that, but he's very respectful also of me, and I acknowledge that. But he doesn't seem to really resonate. He just hovers around the 2 or 3%. No? And it's not about being, I call them old souls, those who are not in the internet or not, but it's a very slick campaign. His launch was the best from a digital point of view, but it still doesn't resonate. I mean, Tito Soto resonates better. Tito Soto's a chance. You know, Tito Soto in the last, until Sara slid down to VP, Tito Soto was leading by a wide margin all the candidates, 40-45%. He slid to 30%, and Sara is now also nearing 50%. But I suspect that you know, Tito has inherent voting strength, and if he spends money, he could catch up. He could certainly catch up if other VPs to stop candidates to stop Sara say, please vote for Toto Sito as a strategic thing. Then Sara could be defeated that way. Pacquiao Atienza, Pacquiao in particular. I actually consider Pacquiao as the riskiest of all the candidates. Going back to Marcos, and some of you might disagree vehemently with me on this. Obviously, I will be saddened if Marcos won because of the history, the legacy of the father, and the family has not repudiated that legacy. But Bongbong Marcos himself doesn't threaten me, to be honest. And I actually have probed that as well with people that have worked with him, that he is, in fact, with the people that he worked with, and that's true also with other senators that I've talked to. He's a kind person, a good person, he's a rational person. You can argue with him. I've actually written several things in the past 10 years when he surprisingly would sometimes use it properly. In the debate over the Bangsamoro organic law, he was the chair when it first came to the Senate. I criticized his proposal, but also praised it. And he echoed that and said he was also surprised that while accepting the criticism that I had also praised it. So he's that kind of person. Of course, I didn't like what they did over the week of misusing my analysis of the disqualification case. But Bongbong Marcos, fortunately or unfortunately, depends on how you look at it, is as elite as Pinoy. He will have Lasalians, Ateneans, UP law people in his cabinet. He is not from Ilocos Norte, he is from Forbes Park. That's the president you will get with Bongbong Marcos. Pacquiao is different. Pacquiao has no governance history. Even his stint in the House and the Senate doesn't reveal anything to him except that he takes on populist issues, changes his minds when it's convenient, doesn't care about rule of law actually, is populist to the max. We do not know who will be in his cabinet. We do not know what positions he will take. And so in that sense, he's the riskiest. Does he have a chance? In Mindanao, what I was hoping is he would get more votes once Sara Duterte did not run for president. But right now, it doesn't look like that. It looks like Marcos got Sara Duterte votes. He's polling better, of course, in Mindanao than other regions. And even in the month that he has been giving money left and right, it doesn't seem that he has gained so much. No? But he's still within range because he's in that range of 8-10%. No? Pacquiao doesn't have any endorsement value. So if he actually withdraws, even if he endorses a candidate, that does not mean anything. Those voters of Pacquiao who are populist voters will just go to the next better populist for them. Moreno and Ong, it has been a surprise to me that he hasn't polled better than he should, than we thought he should. But there's an explanation for that. Before Lenny ran, VP Lenny ran, considerable number of anti-Duterte, anti-Marcos voters were considering him. Once Lenny ran, they abandoned him in droves and in fact rejected him, not just abandoned him, but rejected him in droves and probably will not consider voting for him now, even if he will be a viable candidate against Marcos. I think he has had a good record in Manila as mayor, a mixed record as vice mayor and as councilor. I'm sure you dealt with him. If not, he's from Tondo, but he's dealt with Pandacan issues. I'm sure you've dealt with him. I leave it up to you to decide how he did that. But in Manila, in terms of being good for business, in being non-partisan, retaining good people, raising income, dealing with, physical issues like beautification issues, I think that generally Moreno has been good. Frankly, I won't have any problems voting for Moreno if he stood a chance against Marcos, or if he's the candidate that remains standing and it's only him and Marcos. I think he's very good in rule of law. When I've talked to him, interviewed him at the time when I was thinking if Lenny did not run, he might be the best alternative. So I talked to him what his view for a few hours actually. He always came back to rule of law. That rule of law was sacrosanct, that his government will not favor anyone, etc., etc. I asked him about human rights. I asked him about Laila de Lima. I asked him about all of those things. Then, of course, we have, in terms of chances, as I said, Moreno is trying to get the Duterte support so that if he gets a chance to extract or chop off the Duterte voters from Marcos in exchange to his 10 or 15% of his polling right now, then he would have a chance because he'll be polling around 35 to 40%. He does have, seems like, unlimited resources. I think because early on, quite a number of business leaders, the usual suspects, provided him the seed money for his campaign. Top of mind, he seems to be the most present in traditional media. VP Lenny and Senator Pangilinan have consolidated the vote of the opposition, both the anti-Marcos and anti-Duterte opposition. But we don't know what is the maximum of that vote. Is she peaking already at 15 to 20%? Or are there still votes of that kind that are left out there? There's the left vote, Bayan Munal vote, Makabayan votes. There's the 1% or less that might go to Leody de Guzman, but that's really just 2 or 3%. I would still propose that for Lenny to win, he has to get the Marcos votes, a big chunk of that Marcos votes. The campaign was launched very well, dominance in at least some social media bubbles. It's a volunteer-based campaign. It's a movement, which is good. Very few politicians. There's some, Mayor of Iloilo, Mayor of Cagayan de Oro, many mayors in Bicol, as you can imagine, but not too many local officials, but quite a lot of volunteers. The real challenge is for those volunteers to, as I said, leave their comfort zone, their bubbles, and engage with the Marcos forces at the barangay level, at the village level. Governance-wise, Lenny, for you, an audience like you, has to be the best choice. Rule of law will definitely be paramount in VP Lenny. She'll have good cabinet officials, experienced cabinet officials from all administrations that will willingly work with her. Her platform is middle of the road, rational. Although, it really bothers me that none of the candidates, probably except Leody de Guzman and Walden Bello, which is clearly a left-wing sort of socialist platform, none of the candidates have released a comprehensive platform. So I cannot tell you who was the best in terms of platform, except if you are socialist, of course. Leody de Guzman and Walden Bello should appeal to you. But otherwise, the other candidates, they really don't have platforms. They're selling themselves as personalities. And that's why VP Lenny did not run as a liberal party, run as a liberal candidate, but she's selling herself as VP Lenny, and everything that she has done as vice president and before that as governor, as representative. One critique I would have of the Lenny campaign, or maybe not, because it's a movement, but it's not really the campaign that I'm criticizing, it's the movement and it's people in the movement. Is some are really quite self-righteous and condescending on others that think differently. Which means you are not going to convert voters on your side. If you're gonna start with saying, bobo ka, bakit mo iniisip yun, di ba? Bakit ka pro Duterte? If you're gonna start with that, you're not gonna convert a person. Does she have a chance of victory? Of course, she has a chance of victory. If that, what I said happens, the bubble moves mainstream. But I think all the other candidates have to actually try to get together still. Because as of now, in terms of polling, and as I said, it's frozen for 2 or 3 months. All the votes of Marcos together is more than all the votes of all the other candidates together. I talked about Bello, and I don't think they have a realistic chance of victory, but this is in fact a platform conscientization candidacy. Of course, they will not admit that they do not want to win, but it's a very long shot, they know, but they want to educate people and strengthen their movement. So to end, I think on the remaining the candidates, we have Marcos that has the edge, but Robredo, Moreno, most likely either or both of them can be in a position to catch up with Marcos at the end of March or in the middle of April. I think not too much for Pacquiao, but would not rule him out because of his percentages and of being a populist. And of course, as I said, I don't think Lacson has a chance right now. Maybe the debate will change that, but even if it does massively well in the debate, that won't change too many votes already. Around 5 to 10% votes change in the debate. But that made Duterte win over Poe and Rojas. The debates was critical for Duterte to overtake. Marcos, of course, while having the edge, has the disqualification, and that is not predictable on how that will resolve. And there's Duterte that might decide to really go after him, influence the disqualification case, attack him even more badly, tell his supporters to abandon him, etc., etc. Or Duterte might actually in the end coast along and say, have deals already with Marcos to be protected, because that's the priority of Duterte, to be protected and prevented from being sent to The Hague for an international criminal court trial, which is likely, by the way. The race could tighten to 2 to 3 candidates. That's the best scenario for me. My best scenario is that after Holy Week and after the debates, we'll only have 2 candidates. And then we just have to choose the better one among the 2, not the lesser evil, but the better one among the 2. Or if it's 3 candidates, the same thing. The effect of pulling out of any candidate is difficult to predict. In terms of polling, Scott Moreno daw will benefit if other candidates will parang he's the second choice of Marcos, Robredo, Pacquiao voters. But it's very difficult to predict that so much movement will happen in that case. Campaigns will be decisive. Social media, as I said, now less than the sorties, because there will be no sorties for 2 months at least. Debates could matter, change dynamics if they're close enough by the time. Local machinery could matter, and there Marcos has an advantage right now because of the pandemic. But maybe the Mandanas ruling might lessen the effect of that, because local governments might think we don't have to side with the president because we'll have money anyway. Same with local elections. And then finally, I want to end with post-election scenarios, no? But not go through them very much. I would just want to say that what I hope is that there's a decisive victory in the elections, that the will of the people is clear. Even if I disagree with it, I can live with it. I think that what is important is we elect someone for 6 years. We push on rule of law as the minimum. And if you're able to do that, have the chance to then reform our politics. Our politics is in bad shape. But there are opportunities to change that if we can. The worst case scenario is an indecisive, uncertain result that will happen, because then that signifies another 6 years of turbulence. For the Ateneans here, you would recognize that that's Father Roque Ferriols, my philosophy teacher, our philosophy teacher, who died last year. Since he died, I used that as my final slide for this talk, because he's famous for saying, ang katapusan ay bagong simula rin. And I always say this election is not the end of the Philippines, regardless of the results. I think all of us here are old enough to have gone through martial law, gone through EDSA, gone through GMA, gone through these turbulent years of the Duterte government. This country and these people is too big, too talented to collapse, and it won't collapse. It's just sad that it won't necessarily get better, or it will still get worse before it gets better. But if we don't abandon it, it will get better, and I truly believe that. Thank you. Sorry for running.
Thank you, Dean La Vina. We now call on our panelists, Ms. Daday De Leon, for the first question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dean, you always provoke, and we get to be confronted with a lot of realities just listening to you. I have to pick out two things. First is the one that we collected from the audience just prior to this session, and the other one is my own question. So I'll start with my own. Dean, what can you say about the business bloc as well as the youth vote? Are they not really influential even in past elections? Because you always mention, and you also analyze in terms of the A, B, C, D, E voting preferences. But what about this? I could say that probably they can influence. I'll start with that first.
The business bloc is probably lumped under A. Kaya it's hard to distinguish, di ba, yung what really is the business bloc, other than through the surveys you did of the Makati Business Club, of PPCCI, all of that, di ba? But in terms of voting preferences, talaga nakalump sila. So very few in the business bloc are actually being polled directly. Kasi the polling kasi, the sampling is about choosing barangays, and they will only choose one, let's say one Forbes, two Forbes persons, or one person in a condo, that type of thing, di ba? So talagang hindi siya makaka-capture, di ba? Ang mas tinitingnan sa business bloc is the financial support it can give to candidates, especially the big di ba, the big the entrepreneurs, no, the top entrepreneurs. I mean, that you can quantify naman, and you can see the footprint of that. You know why some campaigns are able to manage better than other campaigns. But I think that the business community would need to have a stronger voice, and maybe not on candidates but on issues, no? For example, for me, the biggest disappointment in the business community for me in the last 6 years, especially in the first 3 years, di ba, was their being cowed on rule of law. Di ba? Kasi yun ang, dapat yun ang pinaka number one issue ng business community, di ba, rule of law. When nagsimula yung pagpapatayan sa mga mahihirap dahil sa war against drugs, di ba? We didn't really see a very strong pushback by the when certain business personalities were attacked. We didn't really see the business community, and there's a reason for that. Of course, they're also afraid, di ba? So sana if you had a stronger voice there. The youth voice is actually quite important, no? The plurality of voters will be 18 to 30 years old, no? Which is how youth is defined. I think 35%, parang ganon. 6 million voters for new voters alone, no? Makikita mo naman yan kasi sorted out according to age. The random sampling is based also on age, on residence, on ano. So makikita mo naman yon. Pero walang discernible youth vote, no, to be honest, on the president in the past, no. So it's always been seen as a potential, no. Pero this time kasi maganda sana kasi social media, iba yung karanasan ng youth sa social media, di ba, than many of us. I don't know how many of you in social media. Ako naman, nandun naman kasi I teach. But ang youth, iba. Even ako, I will not say I have the same experience as my children, di ba? I don't do TikTok. Nanonood ako, pero takot ako mag-TikTok. Ma-misuse, di ba? Kasi teacher din ako, di ba? So takot ako mag-TikTok. Pero, but sa movement against discrimination, nakafocus kami sa TikTok kasi it's also being used for this information. But theoretically, you can get the youth vote to care more about climate change. For example, to care more about anong tawag nito? About jobs, because that's what they are concerned with, no? Less about geography. The other thing na sa polling na nakikita natin, si Marcos na consolidate niya 3 blocks, regional blocks. Northern Luzon, expected yon. Mindanao, as in 50 to 60% consolidation, ha. Sa Northern Luzon, more. And third, Metro Manila, na consolidate ni Marcos yan as of now. Kaya formidable yung ano, no. But kung youth, pwede mo silang mahila from their geographical, ano, di ba? From their parents. But this is what Daday, I have to say. None of the candidates are doing that.
Yeah.
That's one of, kasi risky siya, di ba? Kasi never siya done. Never siya done. But I don't see any discernible youth, on from VP Lenny, from Marcos, from any of them. Walang discernible, may mga youth champions, youth campaigners, pero wala akong nakikita, di ba? Same in 2016, walang direct appeal to the youth, di ba? And so that's a game changer if any of the campaigns focus that. But syempre, that means putting resources, di ba? And yun ang takot ng mga tao, put resources kasi hindi pala oobra, di ba? Ayun ang takot ng mga tao. But maybe ako, if I were VP Lenny or Isko, I would do that, or even I would do that. Kasi anyway, medyo naman behind. So, might as well take risk, di ba?
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. I'll pass it on to Paolo. Or Art?
Art, go ahead.
Dr. La Vina,
Yes.
appreciate very much your very deep insights on Philippine politics. And my question is this: given the almost insurmountable lead, plus the self-fulfilling character of the polls and surveys, people joining the bandwagon, business investing on the front runner, we now tend to see a foregone conclusion, if you know what I mean. And therefore, my question is this, how would you paint a plausible scenario for a Marcos Jr. presidency and beyond?
First, I'm not saying the lead is insurmountable. I think it is surmountable from January to March. But difficult, the lead is still like that in March, end of March, Holy Week, I think we can assume that already. It's gonna be very hard, di ba? After the debates. But may inflection points naman na ano, ang problema lang, na-freeze ang campaign because of the surge. Di ba? Literally na-freeze ang campaign. Or they have to really think about very effective social media campaigns, di ba? And pour a lot of that because that might be ano. So I want to be sure lang na inaano ko. Ang palagi lang naman sinasabi, but if you keep on campaigning the way you campaigned from October to December, you will lose. Di ba? Ano naman yun? Parang you will lose because of that. The bandwagon will not happen until end of March. Pag end of March, April, ganun na ang bandwagon, they will all go na to the winner, including the business community. Now, to answer your question, and again, I told you, some people get upset when I say this. I recognize the Marcos legacy, and I'm very sad and embarrassed, angry about why the country is dealing with it this way. It's not the first country that's dealing with it. Peru had to deal with it. I mean, many parts of the world deal with comebacking families, political families. So it's not unique. Hindi tayo na, kasi ang bobobo natin, ang, di ba? No, this is a regular phenomenon of politics in all countries, di ba? Because a dominant family, even when it's overthrown, still has remnants and then rehabilitates themselves, comes back, and if they get the imagination of the people, they're positioned to influence again. So that's not unique, but it's still sad and embarrassing and makes me angry. So let me be very clear about that. But I'm not afraid of a Bongbong Marcos presidency, because when I look at the person, the family, and families that he deals with, that influences him, from his wife to everyone else, to the intermarriages they have made, to the political alliances they have made, this is Philippine Elite 101. Really. It might be a different Philippine elite of Noynoy Aquino, but interlocking, to be honest, diba? Interlocking with GMA, with Aquino, with, it's interlocking Philippine elite. I mean, any kind of objective, people get upset, but sabi ko, look, I can give you the family trees. Diba? I can give you the league, I can give you the kaklase, kaibigan, kamag-anak. And they're the same pattern. So, na nakasanayan natin, and it makes me sad too, kasi grabe naman ang politika natin, ganito na lang ba palagi? Di ba? I wish we had party-based politics. I wish we had ideological-based politics, di ba? Platform-based politics. But can't we ask for something more than this? But the truth is that a Marcos presidency is di ba? It's a very different from a Duterte presidency, because Duterte did not have this kind of, di ba, elite, you know. Maybe the first Marcos presidency was like that, from Ilocos, although Marcos was UP Law. And so Marcos had the UP Law connections and the UP connections. That's why his cabinet were all UP, di ba? But I'm gonna predict Bongbong Marcos will, one joke, one for us UP Law, Janet, di ba? One sad thing is we don't have justices anymore. I'm gonna bet several of Bongbong Marcos justices of the Supreme Court will be UP Law graduates. Nothing more but the fact that they're familiar with UP Law graduates.
I don't think so.
They're familiar with many, not necessarily the people we know, di ba? I mean,
yeah.
But it's the familiar people, di ba? So that way, you know, I mean, I think Bongbong will probably appoint business people that you know. So from that point of view, now of course my worry is that, as I said, Bongbong doesn't seem to be very knowledgeable, very engaged, at least from the campaign. wala talaga siyang sinasabi. Hindi ko alam na intindihan niya ba yung mga issues. Countries faced with several big issues, di ba? And then we might have a president. And I know how it is in the Philippines. The president matters the most. So we could have incompetence because of that. So I'm not going to immigrate the next day after Marcos wins. I'm not gonna tell my children time to go. And I will actually call on Marcos to be true to what he said, that he wants a unity government, and suggest brazenly people from all the political parties and fronts to be in that government, and see whether he in fact is serious about having a unified government.
Thank you, Dr. La Vina.
Hi, Dean Tony. Magandang umaga uli. We're looking at the chat box. First of all, I'd like to highlight ang dami pong praises and thanks to your very informative discussion and lecture. Now, I'd like to pick up two questions from Joe Villegas. One is the GMA Gloria Arroyo factor. Was she really a broker in the Sara BBM marriage? And number two, Lenny Robredo. Is it to her advantage? In hindsight, running as an independent, is that really the best that she could have done when she launched her presidency? Yun lang dalawa.
Yes. The answer to the second question is it looks like it's the best choice, because in fact the yellow brand, the liberal brand, is really parang hopelessly tainted siya. So parang at least nakita mo naman na hindi na masyadong yung mga dilawan-dilawan, hindi na masyadong ganun ka-effective against Lenny. Ano yung first? Sorry na ano tuloy ko.
The GMA factor in the elections. Gloria Arroyo.
Yes. From what we know, what GMA wanted was Sara and Marcos. And that she thought she had a deal already that was going to be announced in Balisin. But Marcos was a no-show in Balisin. At the same time, we do know that Sara really has doubts about running for presidency. Wasn't that convinced, especially because this one is not from Sara but from me. I think Sara doesn't want to be president on the backs of his father. I just look at the relationship, and if he wins for president, if she becomes a VP and or later on become president, she doesn't want to owe the father anything, basically. But yes, I think there's enough insider story to say that GMA made that effort because at some point it looked like it was just going to be Marcos and Sara was not going to run, or Sara might run against Marcos, and GMA knew that that was not going to work and made the intervention. Sara trusts GMA. Sara considers GMA her advisor, her mentor.
Okay, thanks, Dean. Daday, back to you.
Yeah, I have this question, and this is coming from some people who are based here outside of the country. Dean, there were some talks that said that that eventually Marcos will be disqualified and Sara will then become the presidential candidate. And what can you say about a two women fighting for a position? If it's going to be a Lenny versus Sara fight?
Well, that would be interesting, but that won't happen because if Marcos is disqualified, there are two options for Marcos, two scenarios. His candidacy can be canceled for material fraud, meaning to say he lied about his conviction, about his qualification. If the candidacy is canceled, he can no longer be replaced. If that happens before the elections with a final judgment by the Supreme Court, then the only ones remaining in the ballot will be voted on. So that's Lenny, Moreno, Pacquiao, Lacson, etc. Right? So in that case, wala namang Sara will not be able to substitute Marcos. If Marcos instead of being canceled, is disqualified. If it happens before the election, final judgment, he can be replaced, but only by a Marcos. So my scenario there is still woman versus woman. It will be Aimee versus Lenny, possibly, right? If it's before the elections. The third
Thank you, Dean.
scenario,
Oh,
which
okay.
the Duterte people are hoping will happen, ito yung mga kasi ang dami talagang na-disappoint when Sara dinatran. Ang daming umiyak, ang daming na-disappoint nang sa Davao group, no? And the Duterte group, they thought that was their talagang ability to stay in power. The third scenario is is Marcos is disqualified. Marcos wins the election, disqualified after the elections. The vice president will now become the president. So Sara becomes the president. So walang scenario na maglalaban si Sara Duterte at si VP Lenny. But Sara, there's a scenario where Sara can become president if a president doesn't qualify. Because kung disqualification after the elections, may nanalo na, you cannot have the second person, di ba? The loser, kumbaga, to become the president. You wouldn't, even the loser shouldn't do that. Di ba? You didn't want to do that. So the VP is the one that will ascend. Of course, untested lahat ito kasi hindi pa siya nangyari. So the Supreme Court will still have to decide kung how to implement those provisions. But that's my reading of those provisions.
Thank you, Dean. All right, one more question. Dean, this time on the research, this polling outfits, and you said something about that you trust the SWS and Pulse. Can you give us a bit of maybe a background? How do they actually do their sampling? That's one. And second, how are they funded?
Very good. Let's start with the funding. The funding for the basic questions for presidential preferences and horse race and issues ganyan is self-funded yan. They don't have that commission. It's a regular polling nila, ha? But candidates, individuals, business people can pay for certain questions. For example, you want to check kung mag one-on-one si Sara, si Bongbong at si Lenny, ano yung voting, di ba? Kung mag one-on-one si Lenny versus Isko, ano ang voting? You can pay for that. They don't do that kind of so ganyan lang naman the basic questions are self-funded. Well, funded by subscribers, no? SWS and Pulse Asia would have regular subscribers, business and individual, politicians, who they're usually given the results at 2 or 3 days ahead of time, even if embargoed pa siya. Diba? Yung mga commission results are always embargoed. Commission questions are always embargoed unless the commissioner, the one who paid for it, releases it or authorizes its release. Diba? Yun yung difference ng dalawa. Now the sampling is very basic. By the way, I'm saying this and it's basic literature naman, but I was in the board of SWS for almost 10 years, no? And always followed the step-by-step process just in case we have to defend it in court or elsewhere. It's very basic. They look at the voter registration, percentages per region. They look at the economic data per region. ABC, that's how they distinguish A, B, C, D, and E. Then they choose the barangays that are representative of those sampling. And then within the barangay, they choose the houses. The houses are chosen on the basis of how the houses look like, and of course the interview itself will reveal that the income, etc., etc. That's how they would then aggregate. No, it's very expensive way of doing things. It's not the way it's done in Europe, in the US now. because the way it's done now in US, you have is cell phone. Before that, landline. When it was in the landline in the US, it was also very good. But with cell phones, it's harder to see whether people that are answering a cell phone really live in that place or that place, diba? And secondly, of course, you know, there's a lot more reticence and reaction of the person being polled in the US, so that's why it's hard. The polling is less accurate. Has been not too accurate in the last two election cycles. Certainly Trump and Biden, well, still overall well in terms of the state, in terms of specific voters, they miss out a lot. But in our case, so far they've kept to that model, and I think they're pretty accurate because of that.
Thank you, Dean. Over to you, Art. Art, questions for Dean? You have to unmute yourself.
Art, please unmute.
You talked about the random sampling method. I guess there will be a little bit of character of a stratified sampling as well.
Yeah, they will part of the questions they ask always sa initial random pa lang, di ba, in approaching the house, in deciding the village, the barangay, may stratification na yon, di ba? Like if they're gonna go to a Makati barangay, they will make sure they will choose some barangays that are villages, but many of the barangays will have to be in the dense areas. Ganon yung ano. And then when they go to the house, may second check pa. How much is your income, di ba? And then they actually have a validation pa, the TV, TV, aircon, mga ganong klaseng ano, di ba? Para may way of checking lang ng tama ba yung pag-stratify.
Okay, thank you.
Dada, if I may, on the environment question, I wanted to, dun sa chat, I mean, syempre that's close to me. Yes, for me, certainly that would be one of my lens, di ba? And right now, to be honest, that would be Lenny, Lacson, De Guzman. They're the three ones that have positions on at least disaster and climate change, no? Pacquiao and Moreno doesn't really have strong environmental and climate no. But I would still consider Lenny and Lacson as weak on climate change, no? It's not top of mind for them, which is my experience naman sa Philippine presidents natin. Naging top of mind lang pag may disaster na. Otherwise, climate change is not a day-to-day thing that they worry about, di ba?
Dean, there's a question on local government from Rafika Pinpin. Given na wala munang administration candidate, how would the local government LGU elections pan out? Walang administration candidate, so walang endorsement. And then vice versa, since walang administration candidate, paano yung support ng LGU to the national candidate? What would be the dynamics like on an LGU view lens?
Sa ngayon, the answer sa ngayon is we don't know, di ba? Kasi baka naman si Duterte at some point mag-issue ng malinaw na endorsement, malinaw na order, di ba? And then yung mga tao na nasa gobyerno na politicians will follow him. We'll have to follow him certainly. Pero yung mga local politicians from congressman to mayors, etc., sa tingin ko the train has already left the station on that, di ba? So parang they feel na, wow, salamat. We can do anything we want. Right now, yun ang sinasabi nila sa akin. And, you know, one of the reasons I'm kind of well-informed about this is because I have thousands of students who are local politicians. No? Maganda sa School of Government na Ateneo, mga estudyante namin, councilors, marami akong congressman, senators, governors, pero ang dami talaga akong students na councilors, barangay captains, and I'm quite close to them kasi hindi ako judgmental, as you might have seen there, di ba? I'm open. Kung Marcos ka, so okay lang sa akin yun. Tell me nga why Marcos ka. Hindi ako nag-ano doon, or kung whatever you are ano. And so when what they're telling me is, for the first time ever, malaya sila to decide kung sinong gusto nila. Unfortunately, ang question nun is, sinong bibigay ng pera sa kanila, di ba? Sino
Correct.
yung may kilala sila, di ba? Hindi not gonna be sinong pinakamagaling. I mean, I would like to claim that my students say sila ang pinakamagaling. Pero nagtatawanan lang kami doon kasi parang part yan sa hindi mga hatol, di ba? Na ano. Sabi ko, ikaw ha, dapat pinakamagaling ha. Siyempre sir, di ba? Tasawa na lang kami. Then iba na. Alam nyo, what's funny also about this election, and sad ha, is people are polled about issues. Actually, sa stat-based, commission a poll in October on issues. Di ba? Filipinos are well-informed on issues. Alam nila ang issues. Filipinos also are well-informed on what is the criteria of people they should vote for. Not corrupt, visionary, all of that. Yung competencies, ganyan. Pero pag tinanong yan, tapos tinanong mo sino yung preferences nila, you'll be surprised, di ba? Because Marcos is still the one that the majority of the people who want an honest person, a change agent, yan naman gusto ng mga tao. Malapit sa mahirap, compassionate, who will take care of the pandemic, di ba? Who will make sure livelihood, yung lahat ng yon. Tama ang sagot ng mga tao. Kung in-exam mo sila on issues, tama ang ilang sagot. Pero pag in-exam mo sila sa personalities, depende kung anong choice mo, you'll be surprised. Kasi objectively lang, marami doon sa mga nagsasabi na ito ang gusto nila, na tama yon, Marcos ang pipiliin nila.
Okay.
Huwag niyo akong awayin na kasi sinasabi ko lang yung resulta ng result. It surprises me. It surprises me, di ba? Kasi syempre, it surprises me, but that's how people are responding to ano. So hindi rin siya yung bobo ang mga tao, di ba? Or uneducated yung mga tao. Hindi yun, there's something, I don't know, there's something to really, I think it's more sa personalities also. Kasi parang gusto lang ng mga tao yung personality, di ba? Gusto ng tao yung personality. Siguro, I don't know, there's something about the Marcos pictures, images. He's sounding like his father and looking like his father. That's the clear. Alam ko, may mga advertising experts naman siguro dito sa inyo, di ba? That's the very clear peg, di ba? Ako ang tatay ko, bumalik ang tatay ko. Talagang clear yun na peg. And maybe, di ba? Parang people find that impressive or like that compared to nanay or, di ba? Or parang ganon, I mean. And wala nga distinction then between A, B, C, D, and E dun sa voting preferences.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question then,
Dean?
Yeah. So how much of this, tama yun, ano, sinabi mo na if you ask them about the preferences, ito yung mga gusto nila, very ideal, alam natin. And also, in the end, yung presidential candidate na gusto nila, it seems to be not representing yung mga ideals na inaano nun. How much of that social media and revisionism and fake news and trolls are really playing a part in this this mind setting?
For sure it does, di ba? That's why it's one of the things I'm doing as a non-partisan person, focused on sa uncovering that and challenging Facebook, TikTok, YouTube to take down as many of those as possible, di ba? So that work is being done. Pero I would also think na hindi lang yon, di ba? But similar pa rin na issue. It's the campaigns. That means successful ang Marcos campaigns to convey on these issues because they're probably looking at the same thing as Strat-based was looking at, di ba? What do the people want? What are the issues that people want? So the Marcos campaign is able to convey na, di ba, we get you and we will do what you want, di ba? Which the other campaigns might not be failing to do, di ba? I don't wanna rub wounds on salt on wounds, no, but there's been quite a debate in the movement, in the Leni Robredo movement, on how bad the advertisements have been or good. Di ba? May debate. It's a real debate that went on. Some say, I'm very strong supporters, ha? Ang sama ng ano, di ba? Ang sama ng mga first videos, mga first, yung ganon. Some naman nag-defend naman. So nandun. But there's big debate. You don't have the debate in the Marcos scam. Napaka-tight yung Marcos scam. Sabi ko nga, sa Marcos, hindi mo siya ma-interview. Hindi nagpapa-interview si Marcos. Control talaga yung press, di ba? That has benefited him. That's not good for the country. I'll accept that, but has benefited his campaign. So sa akin, it's social media and disinformation plus campaigns. It's not wrong then to say pera lang yan. Villar had much more money than Pinoy, but lost to Pinoy on the basis lang of messaging and, di ba? In fact, on the basis of messaging, yun lang talaga yung ano na out message, ano na, well, lump siya na corrupt, di ba? Si Villar, closing and people did not like corruption because of the 10 years of GMA. So nag-succeed si Pinoy in framing that and then being the change candidate.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Art, over to you. Art, you have to unmute yourself again.
Doc, let's go corrupt. Grassroots, LGU. Ang sabi nila, sa halalan daw, ang bilangan ay nangyayari ng 3 beses. Ng una, sa balota, sa pagsulat sa balota. Yung pangalawa, doon sa tallying of the sheet. Yung pangatlo, doon sa COMELEC. Meron bang resources yung mga kandidato to control these things in those 3 places?
Sa balloting, yes. Kasi yun yung operation day, di ba? Yan yung election day operation, yung ground war yan eh. That's really about bringing your voters, including vote buying. Vote buying now, di naman talaga yung bigyan kita ng pera, bumoto ka. Ang vote buying now is dalhin kita sa presinto, di ba, may kasama na siyang mga, in fact ngayon, kung may pera na exchange, electronic na lang lahat yon, di ba? Marami doon electronic na. But definitely that happens there and most of it is there. Alam mo, from what I know, and I follow the Marcos Robredo protest, di ba? Vice VP protest. Palang walang ability to change the tallying and the canvassing, yung second and third mo na ano. Parang walang ability to change it massively, di ba? Parang theoretically it can always be done by, di ba, by fixing all the machines, but even that is not likely, di ba? And when the machines were open in the Robredo case, di ba, walang significant gaps. And in fact, Robredo won more votes in the Bicol area, but that's explainable. In fact, I tell my clients na, but I tell my clients, don't file any protest if ever man matalo ka kasi sayang lang yung pera. You use the money lang for the next election. Di ba? Like what Marcos yung mga millions, hundreds of millions ginastos ni Marcos. Natalo siya fair and square, di ba? But if you really have to file a protest and you have to select 3 provinces na gusto mo magpakita ng, kasi you have to show na nag-recover ka, to show na the system is, something's wrong with the system, di ba? Choose your bailiwick. Kasi your bailiwick will yield you additional votes, di ba? Simple lang naman. If there are 2,000 votes for you in a precinct in Marcos, in Ilocos Norte, in a precinct there, 2,000 votes siya, and the opposition, let's say Leonard already got only 100. The chances are, in the counting, maaring may makaligtaan na 10 votes na Marcos rather than 100 votes ni Robredo, di ba? Kasi mas maraming chances na may votes ni Marcos na hindi na-count kasi marami siyang votes. That's why Robredo ended up with overall sa 3 provinces like a few thousand more votes, but still insignificant to change the results, no? The problem lang ating sistema lang is napaka untransparent, di ba? The results just come up. And parang wow, yun na. Di ba? It just comes in and yun. Hindi tayo sanay ng ganon. Lalo na tayo sa generation natin, nasanay tayo na may ballpen and paper, di ba? Paglabas ng mga results, hanggang ngayon ako, ganun pa rin ako. Stupid me, di ba? Paglabas, kasi election fanatic ako since 1969, but 11 years old pa lang ako. Yung grandfather ko kasi, nationalista party, politician, favorite ako ng grandfather ko. Tuwing election day, sinasama niya ako mag-iikot-ikot. Tapos pag start na ng quick count ng mga radio station, upo kami together, siya may paper at ballpen, may paper at ballpen din ako. So bibilangin ko na sa di ba? And I will do that the whole day, the whole evening, di ba? Even nung may mga quick count na, mga habit lang siya. Pero ngayon, di ba, by midnight, alam mo na kung close fight, kung hindi close fight, we will know by midnight. Like we knew last year, Duterte was going to win by midnight. But if it's a close fight, yun yung pwedeng may dayaan. I mean, but it's still difficult to figure that out, di ba? And what the right strategy is. But when I say close fight, 10,000 votes, 5,000 votes ang difference nationally. Dapat talaga mag-recount pag gano'n, di ba? Pero pag ang difference is 200,000 votes, you cannot find that 200,000 votes anywhere to recover. We saw that in Marcos. Robredo versus Marcos.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you.
Dean, I have the privilege of asking the last question or comment for the Q&A. You've given a lot of good inputs, a lot of insights, and that has made us reflect as we discern kung sino iboboto natin sa May 9. Ang title po ng ating webinar today is Pag-asa or Pagdurusa. Ano yung mensahe nyo sa amin to have that right discernment? Sa amin, sa pamilya namin, o pati sa mga kaibigan at kamag-anak namin.
Asa o Pagdurusa. Tinatawanan ko nilang ito, pero sa totoo naman talaga, kahit anong resulta ng eleksyon, magdudusa tayo, di ba? May mga questions about political system kanina, so maybe that's the best way to also end this talk in a note of despair or di ba, yung sa totoo lang, because they come from the same elites, no? I mean, and we tried someone who was not from the same elite and it's still palpak, di ba, si Duterte? In fact, mas palpak pa. So parang we will struggle. I mean, huge. The pandemic has opened huge, di ba? Problems, huge gaps in us. And it will continue. Alam natin yon, di ba? I mean, it looks like this will be a permanent reality, and how to deal with it is a challenge. As you know, you more than other people would know how challenging the climate emergency will be in the years to come. I mean, so talagang but I will also just say this, no, kasi kaya Pag-asa din, in the end, tutulakin mo Pag-asa yung mas nangingibabaw sa pagdudurusa. And this reflects, and actually know some of you, I look now at the names and the faces also, and looking at that. And you look at each other, diba? You also know that we have tremendous talent, diba? And because I also work globally, it's quite amazing how globally the talent is there, and how much the talent wants actually to help the Philippines. So grabe yung I actually do a lot of teaching also in OFW communities that are both professionals and service workers and domestics all over, and I see that, diba? Sa field ko lang sa climate change, the biggest issue on climate change now, if you're following this as a specialist, is loss and damage, no? Never mind, we have issues about ambition, issues about how to deal with the future, diba? And not go into a even worse, but the here and now for a country like the Philippines is loss and damage. Kasi even at 1.1 degrees, we are suffering. And we need a predictable flow of money to deal with that suffering. And the norm for that must be, I don't use the word compensation kasi takot ang mga puti doon, takot mga northerners doon, but I use restitution. Diba? People must be restored to where they were before the damage or the loss happened. Diba? Sa atin, mas damage than loss. At least magaling na tayo sa sa saving of lives, di ba? Yung Europeans hindi pa, kaya at sa America hindi pa. Ang dami pang namamatay sa climate events as we saw in Germany, for example. Tayo mas damage. So we need that flow to come in. But I want to tell you that so many of us, including me who's doing the work from the Philippines and from Manila Observatory, are in this area quite advanced than many of our counterparts all over the world. I mean, the number one in the negotiations there is actually someone, well, Janet would know kasi from UP Law, and someone I mentored in the field, si Vice Yu. He's really the number one person in the field right now in trying to figure out, di ba, the political and the legal aspects of getting this done. So even as big a problem as that is solvable, and solvable within a certain period of time. I mean, so sa akin parang gano'n naman, and so malungkot lang sometimes, and so whoever wins in the election, we will have the same country as after. We will have the same people after. We have to work with what we have. There are ideas on how to change the political system. We don't want an armed revolution to change that. But in this country, sometimes big changes happen very quickly. Some of us are ready when those big changes happen. Ako, in my view, 1986, Cory would have had a better chance if he actually fixed the political system instead of just restoring it.
Mm-hmm.
I think GMA would have had that chance, but missed that chance by just going back quickly to the normal. Pinoy had the chance as a popularly elected president. Diba? Ang problema sa Pinoy, I like Pinoy, I like many of the things he did, but he refused to deal with the political system and made the political system worse than when he found it. Diba? And by the time his designated successor, Rojas ran, talagang Rojas ran as a traditional politician with all the traditional politicians supporting him. I think Duterte had that chance. So in other words, we've had opportunities even in the last 40 years, you've seen that, when we could have done this very important political changes, prohibition of political dynasties, move to more ideological, platform-based politics and not individuals, etc. Lahat yan do kailangan ng constitutional change para mag-force ng cultural change, di ba? Ng political culture. It looks impossible, but many times in the last 40 years, I've seen na may opportunities to do that, but our leaders did not take it. And maybe next time, we can take it. Hopefully not in a not in an, I'm not calling for an unstable instability to do that. Sana more rational, di ba?
Salamat po sa message.
I'm a teacher, so I always leave a message of hope. And I really believe it. Maniwala kayo, naniniwala ako sa sinasabi ko, hindi ko kayo binobola. Talagang naniniwala ako doon.
I think, Paolo and Art, we still have a lot of questions actually, Dean. And if you don't mind, we are going to send them to you, of course, through Janet. And if there's a chance, we would like to get your views on those.
Sure.
But thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. So I will leave na for your own.
Thank you. Before you go, Dean, if you still have time, we can you do the closing remarks and then a shot of the gallery for
Yes,
souvenir? Sorry, just a few minutes. Okay, thank you. May we call on, thank you to the panelists and to Dean. And of course, may we call on the president of Club 15, Sammy de Guzman, to do the closing remarks. Thank you. Sam, please unmute yourself. Sam, no sound.
You need to make him a co-host, Mila.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
All right, sorry. There. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Wow, no, it's been a great discussion. Thank you, Dr. La Vina, for your valuable insights on the realities of Philippine politics. Yeah. This election is certainly crucial for the future of the country, and we do hope that we will be able to choose the best and the right candidates to lead and govern us into the future. To our distinguished panelists, Daday, Paolo, Art, thank you also for elevating the discourse and help clarify the issues further with Dean La Vina. We do appreciate also you voicing out the questions from the floor and from the members. So on behalf of the Shell Club 15 Plus, we thank everyone for your time and your participation today. Until the next discussion series, this meeting is adjourned. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Sam. May we please ask everybody to turn on their video so that we can have a photo with Dean La Vina. Sayang, we can do it sana personally, no? Para may autograph, no? Okay. Mahilig tayo sa picture.